So I thought it might be helpful just to say a bit about where this came from, where this volume came from. So as somebody who's been researching Ibsen for several decades, it had struck me over and over how often Laura Keeler came up, kind of as a footnote. And she would be mentioned and then sort of ushered off stage. She was the kind of inspiration, as Sauce said, for A Doll's House, as in she was a young writer who was a friend of Ibsen's, and he sort of was mentoring her. And she was a super fan. She, at the age of 18, wrote a sequel to his play Brand, and it was published. And so that's how he got to know about her, because they were corresponding about it, and he liked the book. And then she confided, she got into some difficulties, financial difficulties, and it was all because her husband was ill. And he needed to go south, which you did at that time, to recover from this tuberculosis. And he wouldn't do it because it would cost too much. And so this is all sounding familiar, I'm sure, if you know A Doll's House. And so she confided in Ibsen's wife that they had money troubles. And I won't go into all the plot details because we have a very short amount of time, but I think a lot will emerge. But Ibsen got, she basically had said, could you, I have these money troubles, I've written a book, everything depends on it being published. Could you intervene with your husband? If you could just send it to his publisher, I'll basically be saved if he helps me by recommending it. And he heard from his wife the whole story of her difficulties, but then he wrote to her and he said, no way am I going to recommend this. It's not up to it. This is a rush job, clearly not fully thought out, and so on. And so that was it. Her life essentially fell apart. And so what intrigued me was the fact that here was a woman writer, but also this is a world famous, A Doll's House is a world famous kind of iconic feminist play, and it's globally known and one of the most produced plays in the world. And yet the whole story of how he got the material in the first place generally isn't known to theater audiences, sort of the general reader, and not even that often to students of the play. So you kind of have to dig to learn more about this figure, Laura Keeler. So the idea was to kind of bring her out from the shadows. And then we sort of discovered that she had written a play. And so the thing I want to sort of tease out here is this really interesting development where a few years later, after she's sort of recovering, she writes a play called Men of Honor, which is responding to Ibsen's play A Doll's House and the way he used her life story for his material. And then what happens is that we are arguing that a few years later, Ibsen is processing this play and how it sort of castigates male writers who exploit women and children. Actually, there are two plots in the play. And he writes When We Dead Awaken, which is his last play, in which he's responding to what she had said. So what we're saying in this volume is that it's essentially 3 plays, a conversation across 2 decades through these plays, in which these writers are speaking to each other through their work. And so that's what we are saying about this constellation of plays. And the thing that we are also arguing is that because Ibsen he didn't say a lot about his work, but one of his pronouncements was, you must read my plays in the order in which they were composed. And that's been taken as, absolute law by publishers as well. So they often will put his plays together in chronological order. But if you do that, you fail to see very clearly that there are these plays that are speaking to each other. And actually there's a way in which now, so long, almost 200 years after his birth, actually, we can start to free things up, I think. We can start to look at things differently, and we need new perspectives. So that's what we're hoping to do, really, is to bring Laura Keeler out from the shadows, give her a place finally in this, this on stage, if you will, rather than the shadows. And also to shake up a little bit the way we've understood Ibsen's whole entire, So I thought maybe I would hand over to Sen now.
Hi everyone. So I'm Zhen Sam. I'm a doctoral researcher at Oxford. My research focuses on Ibsen's first English translators who happen to be women, and I've entitled it "Recovering the Female Voice." Since the publication of this volume, I've been thinking a lot about a very early conversation I had with Kirsten, maybe my first supervision after going to Oxford, and we're talking about women's voices in Ibsen generally that have been overlooked and not really recognized by Ibsen scholarship. And she said, "And what about Laura Keeler? Why don't we talk about Laura Keeler? I think next time anyone sits down to read or watch or teach The Doll's House, we should start with the story of Laura Keeler," which is what we've done, I suppose, in publishing The Doll's House in the same volume as Laura Keeler's work. It's been really exciting, this process of being a research assistant on the project, to understand a lot more about Laura Keeler's life and her work, and all the things that have been written about her. For instance, when she was in an asylum for a month, the doctor recorded a patient journal in which he recorded interviews with her about her work, which is one of the things that we're going to try and bring out through our research. I don't have much to say, I'll pass it to Gay now.
Right. Hello, Gay Kynock, translator of the three plays. I think I'll just start by reading what John Dryden wrote in 1668 about translation. He wrote, "All translation, I suppose, may be reduced to these three heads. First, that of metaphrase, or turning an author word by word and line by line from one language into another. The second way is that of paraphrase, or translation with latitude, where the author is kept in view by the translator so as never to be lost, but his words are not so strictly followed as his sense, and that too is admitted to be amplified but not altered. The third way is that of imitation, where the translator, if now he has not lost that name, assumes the liberty not only to vary from the words and sense, but to forsake them both as he sees occasion, and taking only some general hints from the original to run division on the groundwork as he pleases." So that's three levels. Formal correspondence, which is getting the words right. What did Ibsen and Laura Keeler write? The actual words. Then the dynamic equivalence, how did they put those words together to make the play that they've written? Or a sort of modern rewrite, which is not what this volume is. We stuck to Ibsen and Keeler as they wrote it. They wrote for the stage. These are not novels. They're very condensed conversation. If you like, telling what, if it was a novel, would be 500 pages with descriptions and thoughts and everything that goes in a novel. But writing for the stage is a very different craft, and both of them, especially Ibsen, of course, but Laura as well, really, really mastered it. When you write for the stage, you're connecting things all the way through. As the translator, you have to look out for repetitions, you have to look out for the choreography, for the rhythm, the style, and what is going on. You're not interpreting. So I'm not the director or the actor, I'm the translator. You have to stand back and say, okay, what you see is what you get. These are, in effect, the three scripts that we would give to Paul and Anna and the director and the designer, and say, right, interpret. That's not my job or our job as editors at all. So that's what translation is, and you have to know the context, of course, and the language helps. And then you're right, do you want to? No, sorry. And then you start at the beginning and work your way through, and constantly going back and back. Oh, what's this? What? And it's so well choreographed. You have to keep an eye on the punctuation because that's part of the choreography. You have to listen to them saying what, why, what did they actually mean. Wait. And then if we get back to that, it is like a piece of music, a composition. And it's been great fun to do. As a translator, you notice things, you read differently. Timberlake Berger said that actors and translators probably know plays better than anyone else when they've worked on them. I won't take that for myself, but I mean, you do get to read, you read differently. And things you notice, immediately I noticed that Nora is not the flighty woman she's often portrayed as being. She has got a strategy to survive and how she's going to get through this. So she's actually, as you say in Danish and Norwegian, benhård. She's bone hard what she's up to. Also, I discovered that the setting plays a very big role in all three plays. It's called in English a doll's house, and that was too big a leap really to call it a doll home, which is what the title actually means. But the home in a doll's house is a block of old flats. And the action is very vertical. They're going up and down the stairs all the time. The party above, the people coming in below, the post coming in the door. It's all going up the stairs and down the stairs, and we can hear the stairs. In Men of Honour, it starts in a house, and it's all horizontal. And then we go to a theatre foyer. Again, it's horizontal. They go into the theatre from the foyer, and we're actually in a theatre within a theatre. We're watching a play, and then we're watching the theatre with a play going on as well. And then we get to when we did Awaken, and it's totally vertical. It starts there sitting, talking on a horizontal level. Then they go up and up and up and up and up. And at the very end, spoiler alert, they all go tumbling down. And you notice things like that, and you see it building within the language and within the rhythm. And that's so important. And what they, both writers, I think, do is give the actors an enormous amount to work with, and give the director an enormous amount, and the designer to interpret and play with. But the way the words are put together, really, they can be acted. And just a tiny little difference, a tiny little rhythm. And you've got to try and get that into English. If they start with a hard consonant, I can't do it. They're not saying, I can't do it, but can't. And you have to keep trying to get that. Sometimes you can't, but then you can maybe pick it up, get it somewhere else. So you lose some, you win some, but mostly I think we've caught all those things. That is what I would like to say. And now we're lucky enough to have Billy Barrett from Breach Theatre, who has been working with Zen and Kirsten and Ellis, who you'll tell about, on a production.
Yes, thank you. Shall I? Hello everyone, it's so wonderful to be here. Thank you for inviting me to celebrate this brilliant new publication. So as Gay mentioned, I'm a co-artistic director of a theatre company called Breach. Over the last few years, we've been very lucky to work with these three people. Kirsten actually approached us as a theatre company and said, actually in a room very like this at Oxford University, and told me a little bit about this research she was doing into Laura Keeler. And she said, I've been thinking about this for years, and there's not been a production, she's not known about in the English-speaking world. I run this theatre company where we're often uncovering sort of untold stories, or going through that process that Kirsten's spoken about, of bringing people into the light that maybe have previously been in the shadows. And so we were very lucky to be supported by Oxford University, initially through the Torch Knowledge Exchange Fellowship, to essentially sort of try to dramatise this story alongside the research. So what was really exciting was the kind of reciprocal relationship that existed, or that continues to exist, between this original research and translation and the process of creation. So we've been working with this original research, as well as Gay's translation, to devise and write the story of Laura Keeler and her relationship with Ibsen. And that production has been years in the making, through various stages of kind of research and development, initially with Oxford, as I said, and then with an organisation called Ibsen Scope in Norway, who've supported the project as well. And will finally come to fruition next year in September. So we're going to be premiering the work, which is called Burning Down the House, at the Schwartzman Centre in September. Which will be a wonderful kind of full circle moment, having begun life, the project having begun life here. And I would say thinking about the job of the translator, which was so beautiful to hear about it expressed in that way. I suppose the job of the theatre writer and the theatre director is to interpret. And so what's been really interesting and really exciting is this kind of, research engine that's been taking place, branching off into these different outputs, and there being a kind of stage output to this, which is kind of interpreting the research, interpreting the translation, and trying to do this woman justice by putting her life on the stage in some way. That will be next year, and it is our own take on the story, is a dramatisation of the story, but I think very much shares and is inspired by the thesis that is outlined in this volume of works about the relationship between not just Ibsen and Keeler, but between these works that they're writing and how they're in conversation with each other. All that to come.
Thank you so much, Billy.
So what I love here is that sense from what Gay was saying. I was fascinating, Gay, hearing you talk about how you did the translation, because actually a lot of what you're talking about, I've read Doll's House however many times, and I hadn't really thought about the sounds coming through the apartment upstairs. And it's the way in your translation that tiny, tiny details just pop. It's just become visible in the way that they could otherwise blend in, like unseen. So there's a brilliant kind of generativeness to your translation. It sets ideas running, it lifts things up in a way that the whole project is generative and has started other ideas going. So there's a wonderful kind of synergy between all the parts of it in that way. What we're about to shift to is a bit of Laura Keeler's Men of Honor. So if I sort of set the scene of the excerpt we're going to have, Men of Honor, the Men of Honor in the play, and it's a play that wonderfully, I think, highlights the ways in which writing and publishing and criticism and reception and so on is basically a massive male back scratching going on. There's an awful lot of kind of mutual support, let's say, happening within this. And within it, one of the main characters in it is this man who's got a reputation as a womanizer, that his mother denies. He's simply a handsome conqueror. And he's written a book, which is sort of hugely fated, that's about young boys he saw selling flowers on the street. And he bought a couple of bunches of the flowers, didn't buy any more than that, and then saw this tiny, shivering little boy die of cold and thought, what a wonderful subject for a novel, as he wandered past the boy dying in the street. And running through it in some ways are these questions about what you owe to your subject matter. What's the which is an obvious relevance, therefore, to A Doll's House, but also about the treatment, what kind of responsibilities you have, how lives impact on each other. So he's the writer who runs through it, and then at the same time, a young woman living in his mother's house falls in love with him. And partly falls in love with him as the writer of these wonderful books about the poor, books that seem so full of compassion and sympathy and interest in the vulnerable. And she, because she's an idealist, she leaves with him and enters a relationship outside marriage. So an ideal, a free love relationship that isn't tied by law, and then inevitably becomes a kind of social outcast. She's working, and this is a scene in which a friend of hers is, where her husband has visited this sort of friend's apartment, and he's a man who's disapproving of what the other men are doing, won't necessarily say it, and the wife, who's a friend of the young woman who's entered this free love relationship, I think is a really unusual voice in plays of this kind.
And sorry, just wanted to say, I'm not sure we introduced the actors. So Anna Talbot and Paul Ansdell, and we're very glad to have you.
Great. Shall we separate? I don't know.
Let's stand for this bit.
Right.
Clara.
Yes, here I am, dear Emil. I finally discovered his address, the one you've been sneakily trying to hide from me for so long. I never meet him at Madame Rietveld's anymore. He shuns me like a bad conscience.
But what in God's name are you doing here?
What I'm doing? Getting information about Elizabeth. He must give it to me.
My sweet girl obliged me by leaving.
What?
He dragged me in here and wants me to join in a bachelor gathering this evening. I said no. The gentleman might arrive at any moment. This is not an appropriate place to chance upon you.
Alongside my husband. You're here, aren't you?
That's a different matter. But my wife ought not to set foot over this threshold.
Is a bachelor dwelling such an ill-reputed place? You know, there's actually a smug homeliness about the whole furnishing that men wouldn't be able to create. There are traces of a woman's hand here.
Of a woman's hand.
Of a loving hand, tinkering with all the thousands of small details put together. They give such a wonderfully charming impression of beauty and harmony.
Clara.
Have you seen Elizabeth?
Yes, I have seen her.
And you haven't brought me greetings from her? So is she ill, since she hasn't written to me?
Not in the least. By no means ill, but quite the contrary. But Clara, dear, she is... And so you must be able to see...
Emil!
Calm yourself, child. My dear, that's not how it is, as you think, but nonetheless, my child, compose yourself. You can see, can't you, that something is wrong?
I can see that.
I shall tell you.
Tell me.
I shall tell you as gently as possible. He has made her a disgraceful proposition. And she went along with it. She is living here with him. Has been ever since, well, yes, shortly after she left Madame Huitfeldt.
Is there no more?
No, there is no more.
Does Madame Huitfeldt know?
She ignores it. To her, it simply doesn't exist.
And you've been here before?
Yes, I came here once, shortly after, without really having clarified to myself the reason I did so.
Out of curiosity?
Well, perhaps more of a curious surprise that she could have agreed to it, or perhaps sympathy with her because she had done it.
And you think that he...
One thing, however, I know did strike me. There was no bashfulness, no veiled awareness that not everything was as it ought to be, that people looked askance. Far from it. When she greeted me, she looked me straight in the eye, as if everything was just as it should be, and she was quite within her rights.
And that shocked you?
Oh, yes. I can't deny it. I instinctively froze, almost recoiled from this good conscience, this confidence in her moral right to do what she had done. "Give Clara my greetings," she said.
And you never gave me those greetings.
No. Well, truth be told, I balked a little at passing them on. Even more at the fear that she might sense it put me in a difficult situation.
You saw no sign that she had detected...
Look, what's
that
your
he'd-
point? She simply loved him like a trusting child. What's more, for as long as the intoxication lasted, he was intoxicated, and of course showed himself in the most charming light. So is it any wonder she was living in an illusion?
Has the intoxication now worn off?
I assume so.
Was there anything good about him as a child?
Yes, he was a gentle, gifted, charming boy. Fundamentally good. Madame Huitfeldt and Toslev have ruined him.
Will he be back soon? I saw him leave the building.
No, not for half an hour or so.
Splendid. I don't want to meet him. I only want to see Elizabeth.
Well, impossible, child. Go and I'll pass on your greetings and let you know.
Impossible? So, Elizabeth, the best, sweetest person on earth. Oh, Emil, are you so cowardly?
Clara...
No, is your wife's good name and reputation so fragile it can't withstand her exchanging a few words with a poor, fallen childhood friend? She needs me. You know she's no mother. Oh. Will you help me, Emil?
Clara, I stand before you ashamed. How despicable I myself have been with my Philistine sense of propriety.
My dear anxious husband. Oh, look, will you please go out, go into the garden and wait, and I'll make it brief, very brief.
Yes, I shall stand sentry. Promise me now, if you can, to make an attempt at opening her eyes.
No. Oh, I attempted that once, but even had it depended on, I don't know what. I haven't got the heart to again voluntarily raise the flaming blade of the Archangel's sword and drive her out. Her eyes will undoubtedly be opened. He'll take care of that.
So what are you going to do?
By my very presence, prove to her that when things are at their worst, when he too abandons her, turns his back on her, I shall not. That she does have a place to which she can turn with her shame.
Clara, I love you.
Well, that's an old story. Right, go now, my dear foolish Emil. There she is. She's been out.
That was really wonderful. Well, the way you get the shift in that conversation between husband and wife from the "my child," those kind of echoes, like, to the woman with her very, very straightforward point of view, and the kind of turning around the man's assumptions and sense of things and so on. I love that scene, and I also think that that Clara is a voice that I haven't heard elsewhere. So you referred to her in your preface as a raisonneuse. Do you want to talk about the role you think she's playing in the play?
Well, it does seem like that very often in the kind of well-made play of the time, and A Doll's House kind of builds on that tradition, the idea of there's a kind of sensible character throughout the play that will speak the kind of common sense
Truth.
The truth, yeah. The raisonneur kind of coming from the French, the idea of the reasonable viewpoint. And it's sort of helping the audience figure out where to stand kind of ethically. And it does seem like Clara, I don't know, we haven't necessarily talked about this that much, but does it seem to you as well that she kind of fulfills that role in a way? It helps us understand and guides us toward being compassionate toward a fallen woman.
It feels very modern. It feels like particularly now, actually, women standing up for other women. It feels very current.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think
Keela gives her the last line in the play, doesn't she? She says "guard of honor," and then she ends the play on her voice.
Yes.
Kind of sarcastic dismissal of these men and the way they see things. And it's that sense of, I think, it's the subtle shifts, the kind of answering back the way that one of the things that Keela, so you were talking about it as a fallen woman play. So that notion that once a woman's had sex outside of marriage, it's like Eve's fall. There's a kind of fundamental shift in her moral fibre and her quality and so on. And the sense in which Clara's response goes, she's still my childhood friend. She's the same woman she was before. I'm standing by her. And the husband's kind of assumption that this is somehow a tainted household that the wife can't come into then shifts in response. He kind of goes, what am I thinking? Which is a one for you very rarely get conversations where those sort of shifts happen in that way.
Yeah. And actually,
What year was it published?
oh yeah, we haven't been very good about saying. So 1879 is A Doll's House. This was, Men of Honor was written in 1888, published 1890, performed 1890. And yeah, I guess I was going to ask you, because Sauce has written an entire book on essentially the fallen woman or kind of sex on stage. It's called Acts of Desire. Acts of Desire. So you are the person to speak to this issue of what happens to the fallen woman. What, how big a figure is this in theater at the time?
Huge. So, especially on the English stage, but in some ways it's a sort of explosion of plays from about the 1860s to around the sort of, well, it's still being replayed in the 1930s, 1940s. The film Pretty Woman is a replay of it. It's a kind of endless plot. But it sort of starts the end of the 19th century. In some ways, I think it's a pushback on feminism. The sort of women asking for greater freedom, greater rights, greater decision of their own. And then a plot point where as soon as they start doing that, they end up having sex with the wrong person and their lives are ruined. So there you go, you are better off with male protection. So A Doll's House is fascinating because that issue of male protection is sort of separated from the sexual. So Ibsen, and I think he really knows he's doing that.
Yeah.
And then here, I think Keela takes that, and instead of the woman being, I think she's ideologically attracted to the man. So she thinks of him as the man who wrote these wonderful books, who's interested in the poor and so on. And once she's with him in this union outside marriage, he lets her have a certain amount of money that she gives to the poor. And he's like, oh, God, it's a drag on my finances. And the small child who he'd written his great work about, she finds that he didn't die at all and tries to bring him in, at which point the great writer is, I don't want him for dinner. Keep him out of here. So there's a sense of which, and that's her disillusionment with that man is as much a disillusionment about him as a writer and a human being as about him sexually. So there's a really interesting thing about how we create, or how readers, right? create a notion of the author from the work. And I think there's a big question there about realism in some ways, the dealing with the lives of the poor and the marginalised and the disenfranchised and so on, and the idea that that is a fundamentally moral project rather than an exploitative project.
Yeah,
Is
no,
that-
absolutely. And I know we are going to be doing another scene from in a second. And one of the things one of the things about the project, it does involve a little bit of creative criticism, in that there are some gaps we don't have the evidence on necessarily, as in like letters that were burned, for example. But we know that these things happened, and so it's been an opportunity for us to go in and, in a sense, kind of try to fill in some gaps. So what I'm referring to here is that after this play, Men of Honor, was performed, Laura Keeler was passing through Oslo, which is in Christiania, and she got in touch with Ibsen and said, "I'm passing through. Shall we meet?" And he promptly invited her to dinner. And so these two, knew all about Men of Honor, and had read it and so on, and they had dinner at his flat. His wife was not there. And what we know is that it lasted 4 hours. Their meeting lasted 4 hours, and Ibsen broke down in tears. That is what we know. But we don't have the contents of the letter in which Laura described in detail what took place. We have the response from a friend to whom she was writing saying, "That's horrifying. I can't believe he did that," kind of thing. But it's an opportunity when that sort of gap is there to think about where would we find the evidence? And what we think is that it's there in When We Dead Awaken. So When We Dead Awaken is his response to these kinds of, sort of accusations, as he perceived them, that Men of Honor was launching and saying, look what happens to people when you use them and throw them away, essentially. And he then writes this play that sort of reckons with that. So it's really about that sequence of events. I wanted to be sure to get that in there because...
And it also shifts the premises. So the way Doll's House makes Nora not a writer, not a new woman, but a domestic woman.
Yes.
And then Men of Honor has a novelist who's in some ways exploiting other lives. And then in When We Dead Awaken, we have a sculptor. And that's cueing in the... So this is you're doing the encounter between sculptor and model. Muse, inspiration, again.
Yeah, it might be worth just saying how often in this play it's about these two people. So Rubeck is a sculptor who's had lots of success, and he's on to his second wife. And suddenly, so they're kind of vacationing, and this woman turns up, and in the beginning of the script, she's just called a lady. And then it emerges she's the woman he kind of used as his model many, many years ago. And the relationship isn't entirely clear, but there was, they're obviously attracted to each other, and she has all kinds of, deep, deep resentments about how he used her and cast her aside.
Well, and he's also been in a mental institution.
And she's been in a mental institution.
And is shadowed, just to add to it, she is dressed in white and shadowed by a nun.
Yes.
There's a nun who's kind of keeping a watchful eye on her constantly. So you have to kind of imagine a nun in the bushes over here.
And she also carries a dagger in her skirts, hidden in her skirts. That plays quite... No.
The nun is not armed.
The nun is unarmed. It's the woman who's come, the former model for his great sculpture, and she carries this knife hidden in her skirts. So it's all very dramatic and it's sensational. Did you want to add anything about this? Okay. Yeah.
I would just say that Irene, as she would be called, but Irene as be called, she also had performed in vaudeville, to be on stage in.
Yeah.
And at the time, vaudeville was a huge thing. Everyone was going out watching the equivalent to the girls and women performing risque acts on stage. And that also, the fallen woman thing, there's such a conflict there. And anyway, I just put that in.
No, because she's done a bit of everything since then.
And been married to all sorts of
Yeah.
inappropriate gentlemen who've had money and killed some of them and all sorts of things. I mean, it's a very interesting background.
Of course, we don't know that we can believe her when
No.
she tells us.
Well, shall we
Yes.
let them
Yeah.
go for it?
Just trying to work out our angles.
Get up. Once I had found you, I knew immediately how I would make use of you for my masterpiece.
The Day of Resurrection's what you called your masterpiece. I called it Our Child.
I was young back then, without any experience of life. Resurrection, I thought, would be most beautifully and perfectly depicted as a young, untouched woman, unacquainted with circumstances of a life on earth, awaking to light and glory without having to divest herself of anything ugly and impure.
Yes, and I appear like that now in our piece.
Not exactly entirely like that, Irene.
Sorry, not entirely. Am I not standing like that, like as I posed for you?
I became worldly wise in the years that followed, Irene. The Day of Resurrection became something more and something more intricate in my concept. The little round plinth where your image stood erect and solitary, it no longer left enough space for everything I now wanted to add.
So what did you add? Say it.
I added what I saw with my own eyes in the world around me. I had to include it. Could do nothing else, Irene. I enlarged the plinth so it became big and spacious, and on it I placed a clod of the curved, cracked earth. And up from the crevices in that earth swarm people with nebulous animal faces, women and men, just as I knew them from life.
But in the middle of the throng stands the young woman, glowing with the bliss of light. Don't I, Arnold?
Not entirely in the middle. Unfortunately, I had to move the statue somewhat backwards. For the overall impression, you understand. Otherwise, it would be far too dominant.
But transfiguration through the bliss of light still irradiates my face.
Well, yes, I expect so, Irene. In a way, that is. A little muted, perhaps, as required by my revised idea.
This image expresses the life you see now,
Yes.
Arnold.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
and
suppose it does.
in this image, you've moved me, a somewhat washed out me, to be a background figure in a group.
Not a background figure. Let us, at the very most, call it a mid-stage figure. Or something like that.
Now you've pronounced the verdict upon yourself.
Verdict?
Yeah. My entire soul, you and I, we and our child were in the solitary figure.
Yes, but just listen to how I've placed myself in the group, at the front. Beside a spring, just like here, sits a guilt-ridden man who can't extricate himself from the earth's crust. I call him remorse for a life forfeited. There he sits, dipping his fingers in the trickling water to wash them clean. And he's tormented and persecuted by the thought that never, never will he succeed. He will never, in all eternity, have a free path to the life of resurrection. Will remain forever sitting in this hell.
Poet.
Why poet?
Because you are weak and lethargic and full of absolution for all the deeds of your life and for all your thoughts. You've killed my soul, and then you sculpt yourself in contrition and penance and confession. And thus you deem your account to be settled.
I am an artist, Irene, and I am not ashamed of the frailty that perhaps clings to me. For I am a born artist, you see, and so will never anything be other than an artist in any case.
poet you are, Arnold. You dear big, ageing child. Fancy you can't see that.
Can I ask you about the translation again? Because that's what really struck me. Moving from Men of Honor kind of says it straight. You know what relations are between people. You know what they've been up to. And it felt to me slightly like shifting from Edith Wharton to Henry James. You know, this kind of Henry James conversation where people say, he was splendid. And somebody else says, he was, but yes. And you go, what was that? Why are they splendid? And they would seem to similar. Like, have you got a sense of their incredibly definite dynamics, but exactly what's being spoken about often remains,
I think
kind of uncertain.
Rubeck is really exposing himself there. I think he's saying it subtly, but he's saying I couldn't do other than what I did. But I've sort of come to realization. And she's saying, yes, that maybe he's exploited everything and everybody, but he couldn't help himself. And she's saying, yeah, and look what you did. I don't know, is that how you...
And also kind of very firmly saying, you know, almost pushing back and saying, yeah, okay, I exploited you. You know, he's sort of admitting it, but it was worth it. It's kind of,
it's also
you know,
fascinating.
I had to do it.
But the complexity of their relationship. So he kind of says, I never laid a finger on you. And she says, yes, you never laid a finger. What did that do to me?
Yeah.
And if you had laid a finger on me, I'd have killed you. But then that sense, so it's so complex, those relationships.
And it's also made extra complex by the fact that they're talking about it, but using the visuals of a sculpture and moving it around the plinth, as she was moved around the plinth when she performed in the vaudevilles too, in the tableau things.
But I think that's what's so interesting about the backstory of Laura Keeler, because when I first read When We Did Awaken without the backstory, I had the same sense as you. I don't really know what they're saying. Don't really know. I can't really grasp Irene as a character. Can't see, you know, what she's really saying to Rubeck. And reading it after having learned about Laura Keeler, I think I get a lot more anger out of Irene's voice and a lot more of a sense of her accusation that he is not confronting or accepting what he has done to her life.
And actually, one of the things we're saying is that we think we can recover some of the substance of that conversation they had for 4 hours in his apartment because we think he's put it in here. We think that he's used that experience, he was so moved, and incorporated that into, and then of course that was 10 years earlier, so there's been this time to mull it over. So the thing that's so striking is how there's been this sort of processing of their various interactions, and that it comes out as a play. It's really fascinating.
Which is a wonderful sense of he's listening to her not. So she says, you took my life, you made it into a work of art, you did this to me. Yeah. And he goes, oh God, you're right. I will now make another great work of art after your response to my own. So there's this kind of running conversation through all the plays of what's the relation of art to life, how people project images onto each other, what you owe to somebody else as a human being, and how one life impacts on another, sometimes in very, very, very powerful but kind of indefinite ways.
And actually, I mean, the play right before When We Did Awaken is an even more scathing, sort of almost self-flagellating look at the expense, you know, what it takes, the cost of pursuing your calling. John Gabriel Borkman, you know, it's kind of love triangle, and it's even more bracing. This is more sort of almost, it is more Henry James, isn't it? It's just got this more artistic sense to it, whereas it's almost hard to read John Gabriel Borkman, let alone see it, because of the vitriol in the feelings between these deeply embittered people. They're kind of 40 years down the line, and they're looking back with such bitterness, and they're not speaking to each other, and so on. It's really hard. Whereas this is, you know, here they are, each on the other side. There's a stream. The play calls for a stream to be running down, and they're each on the other on one side of it, and sort of there's this very almost beautiful setting for this kind of reckoning. And then, of course, at the end, just as in John Gabriel Borkman, they all get swept away by an avalanche.
Which we're slightly fascinated by. So if you've thought of Ibsen always as a kind of intellectuals gathered in a small room reading it out, or it is a niche theatre, this play ends with an avalanche in which you can see these two characters kind of coming down in the snow in the distance. So quite how that was done, and also what that says about the kind of special effects, large budget that's involved in that.
Yeah.
I think what's also interesting about When We Dead Awaken is that when Ibsen wrote it, he was a rock star. People travelled to Oslo just to watch him walk down the road to his coffee, and they will tell you in his flat that it was like the first paparazzi were running around, and at the same time as being this hugely famous and wealthy man, he's writing that about himself.
Yeah, and it's often been seen as kind of the problem play, as one of the difficult plays. But actually, that's exactly what's said. I would agree that sense that we're trying to, it's not like we're saying, here's a way to make sense of it, but we are kind of saying, there's a context, a kind of subtext here that hasn't fully been taken into consideration, that sheds completely different light on it.
There's also the wonderful figure of the second wife who has
yeah.
had enough of Rubeck.
Yes.
And then every now and then you hear sort of skipping around. It's quite, sorry, I make it sound silly. It's wonderful, but sort of singing "I'm Free" in the background. So there's a huge amount about what kind of agency people have,
Yes.
and where sexuality fits into that, and the kind of way that you can exert your will over someone or not, which is very. It's so far ahead of anything else I've read at the time. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, we should probably open
Stop
for
hogging.
questions.
Any questions?
While we're waiting for questions, I just need to make sure everyone knows how grateful we are to Torch for having organized this event.
Yes, absolutely.
John Kennedy, Alex Koch, and also OUP is here selling books. Thank you. So, while you're getting your questions ready, I just thought I would flag up that we would not be here today if it weren't for these amazing organizations.
Would love an extract from A Doll's House as well.
We didn't have time for that. We thought,
just to hear.
I know.
I mean, I know I can get the book and read it, but to hear, when they're so brilliant, to hear some of the translation. Yeah, I know that place so well in a way.
Well, I mean, one of the things we say in the book is that Gay's translations just are so fresh, and they're so lively, and they're so, as you heard, so speakable. But one of the things we've sort of corrected, if you will, is that actually the door doesn't slam, but forever and ever people have been saying the door slams. But the stage direction in the original says you hear the sound of the door clicking in the lock. She doesn't flounce out of the house. She doesn't. It makes her sound so angry when it's, the sound of the door slamming has reverberated down. It doesn't slam. And we think that is so interesting.
And Kirsten caught the door at the last moment and said, "Are you sure it's slammed?" No, of course it doesn't. But I think he is giving the director, the actors, so much more to work with. Because a slammed door is a slammed door. And, fine, she's crossed off. But she doesn't. She's come to a realization, and she calmly says, "I'm off. I've got to go and get an education and find out, train myself to live a life." So she just goes down. And that's another thing about the upstairs downstairs thing. Because in those old mansion-built blocks, you can hear that there's great big heavy doors, and they just gently close and go click.
It also means that the audience is straining to hear. So instead of being hit with it, there's you're listening after her as she goes.
And it would just undo the entire previous scene if she flounced out angrily, because the whole point is there's been a reversal where she's very calm, and it says icily, kind of coldly, just calm and reasoning. And the husband is flinging himself around in kind of this melodramatic way. So he's the emotional one. So why would she slam the door? So that's part of why you need to get this book.
Because I think tiny details, I think some other people have taken out. So the bit when she says, I'll go and stay with Christina, she'll help, etc. She's got the whole plan worked out. Whereas you read some other translations and you think she's still in some ways play acting. She's kind of going, now I'm going to be independent.
No, not at all. And we discussed a lot about when she sheds her costume like a snake's
And you
getting
call
rid of
it
its
a
skin.
masquerade costume,
Yes.
which makes it even.
And now she's there, sort of pink and naked and about to start again
Yeah.
on her own terms. And so she just goes, closes the door, and off she's gone.
They're probably not naked, it being night in Scandinavia. Well wrapped up.
Yes.
I don't know if it's my expectation, seeing what I expect, but I don't remember a production where I was aware they were in a flat.
Right.
I've always assumed it
Yeah,
was
it's
a
often
house.
just done as if, yeah.
No, they're in the middle flat, I presume, because they go down the stairs always, and then the party's above.
I think it's not normally done
Right. Yeah.
as a flat.
You might see one level, so you wouldn't know, would you?
But the sense of the
there's
sounds
only
coming
one
from
thing.
above. and
Sometimes
so
you
on.
see the house,
Yeah.
they emphasise the house,
Mhm.
and you see the house.
Well, that's probably because from calling it a doll's
Yes,
house.
because in German it's Nora, isn't it?
Yes. But then it being a home, and that in a way the whole building is the home.
But there's a wonderful, I remember detail that, I've forgotten the name of the critic, but he points out that dollhouse at that time, they were like big display cases.
Yes.
They weren't, so we think of, tend to that idea that you open the front wall and lift up the roof, and that, no, there were big glass display cases with the floors, which adds something to that notion of a doll's house, not just she's kept in it, but also she's part of kind of Torvald's public face, etc.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, but it's fine. Do you want to?
Oh, well, so my introduction to these plays is sort of through your thinking of how they link together. And so I sort of take it as a given that When We Did Awaken is about, this meeting that took place and so on. I guess my question is, how far does that reading diverge from, what's the kind of the accepted understanding, in kind of Ibsen scholarship? And so how do you expect this volume and your commentary around it to be received?
I think it's quite new, isn't it? I think when we talk about When We Did Awaken, we normally have a very Rubeck-centric interpretation of the play. It's like Ibsen at the end of his life. He calls it a dramatic epilogue. He's reflecting on his life, his career, his kind of past, and it's all very much about how he feels about it. And so I think Irene turns out, to use Gay's inimitable phrase, slightly washed out character next to Rubeck's, sense of himself as sitting by the stream reflecting on his lost life.
Which where Anna's performance is brilliant, because washed out
Yeah.
is the last word you'd use.
Yeah,
There's that
exactly.
kind of pent-up passion in there. It's
Yeah.
wonderful, yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I would agree with what you're saying, and also that because he has a succession of plays. Master Builder, 1893. He's got John Gabriel Borkman. Basically, the late plays often feature a male character at the center who's kind of troubled by how he's used his life, and it's sort of that. Often it has to do with how he has used other people, and his family especially. But it's seen as the man's play very often. This is about, and James Joyce is partly to blame, because James Joyce, as a very young man, reviewed When We Did Awaken, I think his first publication, and he, of course, scooped right up the man as the center of it all, and the artist's dilemma, and so on. So part of that is we're sort of, looking into that more and seeing it in a different way.
Portrait of the artist as an old man.
Very much. Yeah, so I think it's sort of saying, rather than always see When We Did Awaken as the final moment of, the culmination of Ibsen's soul searching, it's actually, about the male artist. It's actually very much a two-hander in that sense of, obviously there are four characters, but these two are on equal footing. And I think of it now actually as her play. I really do think of it as Irene's play. And that's probably because of watching you, Anna. Yeah.
And there's also Maya, the second wife, is a really interesting other voice as well,
Yeah.
who negotiates what she wants
Yes.
next.
Yes.
And then there's extraordinary, again, you describe it in simple terms. Yeah, she goes up a mountain with a bear hunter.
Yeah.
And he has ideas and she has other ideas. And
Yeah. Yeah.
putting
No,
very
it is an
simple terms,
amazing
But there's
subplot.
extraordinary kind of
Yeah.
dynamics to it in that sense.
Yeah.
So many things happening and so many really strong women in different
Yeah.
ways.
Absolutely.
So is there a connection in your thinking to Hedda Gabler and the book that's burned? Because I always thought about that as Hedda's book. So is there a connection there?
Well, when she says my child, our child,
Yeah.
that goes back
Yeah.
to it, and she's claiming a kind of co-authorship, isn't she? Which is, I thought also that echo. Damn, I just like when she says to Rubeck, "You baby." That's Mrs. Alving to Pastor Manders.
Yes.
Another woman
Yes.
to another man who doesn't understand.
Yeah, there are a lot
So
of
they're
people.
tiny little. It comes out in the translation. These tiny little echoes. It's I don't know. It's like one of those composers where they go, "Oh, you remember that tune?" And a tiny bit of it pops up in one opera for another or whatever.
Are the words the same in the Norwegian?
Baby. Yeah, I think
I
so.
mean,
I haven't
the-
made anything up.
no, but there are different words for the concepts. I wondered if across the place.
But what gets her in the end, and the reason she kills herself, is that it's the reconstruction of the work that was burned. Oh, we can save this, and her school friend, of course, is teaming up with her husband, and it's just
The great kind of Frankenstein's baby is now going to arise. She couldn't get rid of it.
there's no role for her.
I would agree there's a connection. I think we've put a footnote into it
Yeah, I think we have. Yes, I think we have to.
to connect the head. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just Daniel, did you have your hand up?
Sure. Yes, it was great to hear about so many different strands of the project. I just wanted to know more about Laura Keeler's audience. Who was her audience? Who was she writing to? Was it comparable to Ibsen's audience at various points in his career?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. I think it's the same audience. They played at the same theatres. The Man of Honor was published in 1890, and shortly afterwards it had its Copenhagen premiere, and then the next year its Oslo premiere in the same theatres that played Ibsen. So I think.
And the thing is, they were in this small community of Nordic, Scandinavian writers, and so that was part of the problem for Laura, is that kind of everybody knew it was her when Ibsen put the events. You might think, oh well, maybe nobody had to know, but everybody knew because it was a highly public thing that had happened to her. And actually, just to say one last thing, we wanted to be sure to get in about her story is that her complaint to Ibsen for the rest of her life, way past when he had died, she kept reiterating, "I am not Nora," and she wanted him to say, "Please say publicly that I am not Nora." Her problem wasn't necessarily that he had taken her. She didn't say, "I can't believe you took my life." She hated the way he depicted her in A Doll's House. He felt she did a great injustice by depicting her as this kind of flighty, macaroon-eating, lying, especially the lying bit, young woman with no substance and no suggestion that she actually had a career as a writer. So that is something that kept haunting her. And it's interesting to us because, you think the big problem was that he did that thing to her, plagiarizing her life.
Also, she was a very public figure because she had a big career as a public speaker. She travelled all around and was a great champion and advocate of rights for the poorer people and women, and was representative in the Chicago Women's Conference, all sorts.
Yeah, we're hoping that this will help generate more interest and somebody will want to translate her many, many novels, for example. Sorry, you patiently waited, sorry.
There were so many points I could have taken up, but there are just three that occurred to me. I'll mention all very briefly. The first is that before John Gabriel Borkman, we have two plays which actually do feature lost children. There's Little Eyolf, which is this bitter wrangling between the parents of this boy who's drowned and whose being crippled was a direct result of his parents' actions. Then before that, in The Master Builder, we have the twin babies who were sacrificed to their father's ambition because he didn't actually cause the house to burn down, but he feels morally responsible for the fact that he wanted to see his wife's family home out of the way so that he could build something better on the site. And he has this idea that what he calls the servants and helpers, some kind of supernatural power, had caused the fire to happen. The two babies were very young at the time, and because their mother could no longer feed them because of the shock, they both died. So we have real children as well as intellectual children who are sacrificed to art or ambition. Another interesting parallel, which just occurred to me while I was listening to you, was that directly between Men of Honor and When We Did Awaken in yes, 1895, in the Russian theatre we have The Seagull, in which we have on stage precisely this figure of the young girl who's fallen in love with a great writer, Trigorin, which enables her to run away, thrown a lot with him, and become an actress. And when we see her at the end of the play, she's had a baby who has died, and she's still on the stage. And it's up for discussion how good an actress she really is. But she has managed to give herself some authenticity, some agency. Whereas Trigorin, I would hazard guess, has not really grown at all. He's so in love with the image of himself as the great writer who has a right to expect others to sacrifice themselves for him. And you also mentioned Mrs. Alving and Pastor Manders. And in the scene that you were performing just now, we had brought before us very vividly precisely the kind of thing which is mentioned by Pastor Manders as absolutely abhorrent, that people in Paris, the circles in which Mrs. Alving's son Oswald has been living, enter into these free unions. And he says, they have a pleasant family lives together. And when Mrs. Alving is talking about this, she says, well, she doesn't see why there's anything wrong with this. She's far more advanced than Pastor Manders, who is horripilated by it. So these are just 3 points that sprang to mind while I was listening to you, and I do hope that there might be a cause for thought elsewhere.
And in fact, so in Men of Honour, one of the other fascinating figures in that play is the mother of the writer, who starts by kind of in some ways glamorising her son's life. And then when the son almost turns to her for sort of moral guidance in some way and says, I've lived this, I'm womanising everything else, she goes, I don't want to. Enough. Yeah. Really don't want to. And it's a kind of, in some ways, those patterns are both female, Clara's refusal to collude, but the mother, her version of purity being, I don't want to know. So it starts with the possibility she might be a bit more broad-minded like Mrs. Alving. No, she's not. She's absolutely, there's a version of life I want, and there's where I won't even look. So it's a really interesting study, I think, in how those larger networks are working outside. And I think you get, with Keeler, she's really showing the larger networks. With Ibsen, it's that very close concentration on a few people. And you have to try and sketch out, imagine the world around them.
That's such a great way to put it. That's such a really interesting.
But that's the fascinating. I mean, this volume is wonderful for that sense of different writers with very different styles, very different structures.
The only outside world in the doll's house actually is the bank, which was a new kind of bank. And that's just interesting too, I think.
Just to say quickly, one of the things you might be thinking of as well is Camille Claudel and Auguste Bona. And that actually was because he's a sculptor. Yes. People said that at the time who knew about that because it was widely publicized. So that was another, just going back to the question of how did people read the play? Well, some people read it in terms of that story and they kind of thought it was about that. But I just thought I'd throw that out there.
I just wondered if Men of Honour, at the time when she was alive, did it have a stage life outside of Copenhagen and Oslo? Did it travel at all? Do you know?
I don't think it did. It had its production, and also it has production in Copenhagen, and it caused such a huge storm because the main character, Huitfeldt, that writer character, was taken as a satire on Georg Brandes, and then all these reviews came out saying that Keeler was satirizing him in his circle, and a lot of
Georg Brandes, who was like the leading Danish literary critic of the time and super influential.
And so all these reviews came out saying, don't forget Laura Keeler is the person on whom the Doll's House was based. And unlike Nora Helmer, she actually borrows money to buy new curtains and new furniture for her house instead of saving her husband's life. So anyways, all this stuff came out in the newspapers, and shortly after that,
like personal attacks on
Yeah. And so that precipitated her to writing this letter to Ibsen, which then precipitated their meeting with each other. So what we would love is to see Men of Honour on stage in London, because we don't think Men of Honour has had a good enough run yet.
No, we think it would be wonderful.
Totally signing up. So more things generated. I'm aware of the fact it's getting late, so people may have to go. So
yes.
If we can, you're very, very welcome to stay and ask further questions and learn the wonderful things. But if we can say a huge thank you to brilliant actors.